So the process of reflection is the process which helps you to gain wisdom. Now, the wisdom is what we are seeking. Wisdom is the takeaway. Wisdom is that which helps you to live this knowledge. The difference between knowledge and wisdom: knowledge is mere theoretical, and wisdom is when you start living it. It becomes practical, it becomes a part of your life. Now, wisdom is contained in the very knowledge that we're seeking. But one has to go through the process of reflection to extract the wisdom from the knowledge which is contained in it. So if you have not gone through this methodic process of extracting wisdom from knowledge, you will end up with a lot of knowledge, a lot of information, but you will not have the wisdom which will help you to live a life. Can I have the audience back, please? So there is this great disparity in lives of people, where you find that there is a lot of information. We are in an era where there is abundance of information. We are inundated with knowledge. We are inundated with ideas. We are well informed, but it doesn't necessarily translate as transformed individuals. We find that there is a great disparity between knowing and living. And when we look within and introspect, we will come to a realization that, yes, sir, I agree that there is a disparity between knowing and living. And why is it? Is because of this, because you have not gone through this scientific, methodic process of extracting wisdom from the knowledge. Okay, now, the ignorance manifests in three distinct stages. Yes, Ji. The ignorance manifests, Harish Ji, please, in three distinct stages. The first stage of ignorance is lack of information, where you don't have information at all. In fact, we can't seek shelter under ignorance. As we all understand, ignorance is bliss, but you can't surrender to ignorance and feel protected. Ignorance doesn't protect you. As there's a beautiful saying, in other living creatures, ignorance of self is their nature. But in humans, it is a vice. You're committing a sin. It's a vice if you seek shelter in ignorance. So you must know that ignorance exists and it manifests in three stages. The first is lack of information. The second is lack of understanding. The third is lack of experience. Next. Now, the process of reflection, the first point is reflection is a conscious intellectual process known as manana. The process of introspection or self-study addresses the second level of ignorance. Okay, can I have the audience please again? Now, the first level of ignorance, which is lack of information, is addressed by, how is the first level of ignorance addressed by? The first level of ignorance is addressed through the process of acquiring knowledge, which is known as Shravana. Shravana means you lend your ears, you acquire information. Those days, there was no other form of learning other than listening to the gurus. There was no written text or manuals. So they said Shravana. So any form of acquiring information would offset the first level of ignorance, which is lack of information. Now comes the second level of ignorance, which is a lack of understanding. The lack of understanding is taken care of through the process of manana. The manana is actually the process of reflection. And once you do enough manana, you come to a stage where there is a lack of experience, and that you gain through what is known as nididhyasana. At last stage of conversion of wisdom, you gain enough wisdom through meditation and you attain realization. So this process gives you the final experience of self-realization. Now, the knowledge you receive, yes, G, the knowledge you receive from the gurus is only a raw material. Hariji, I'll just keep saying yes, G. So you please keep switching. The knowledge received from the gurus is only a raw material. All right. It needs to be processed through the process of reflection, and that processed knowledge transforms itself into wisdom. The ideal time for reflection is during the Brahma Muhurtam, the auspicious hour between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m., and not to exceed more than an hour and a half at a stretch. And the rest is there for you to go through the point, but I'll explain how exactly the whole thing works. Yes, G. Now, the process of reflection is a very conscious exercise. I don't want to, I think the switching between the document and me explaining is distracting me. I don't know how much you are able to concentrate, but let me be with you all. You have the reference, so you can fall back on that. Okay, if required, I'll come back to that again. Now, reflection is a very conscious process. The process where your intellect revisits these ideas and you start questioning it, you start examining it. The exact same thing happens with the mind. See, when the mind takes up a particular action, the tendency of the mind is whenever you perform an action, the mind's tendency is it has three weaknesses, as it were. Please take a serious note of it. The tendency of the mind, this is the unconscious process happening. The tendency of the mind is at the three levels of action, which is before you plunge into the action, while you're experiencing, and after the action. The mind has three distinct weaknesses, a three distinct tendency, which is exactly the opposite process of reflection. So the effects are also opposite. The effects are also reversed. So what does the mind do before you get into an action? The tendency of the mind is the mind starts craving for things of enjoyment. The mind constantly wants certain things, isn't it? The mind constantly craves for it. So there is a constant wanting, a craving. There's a lust or a desiring, I would call it. So the mind goes on its own into the future, wanting to enjoy the objects of enjoyment. So there is a craving. While you're experiencing, the mind has a tendency to get carried away with the sense enjoyment. It starts indulging in the sensual pleasures. It goes berserk. It runs helter-skelter. It just rushes into the enjoyment. There's so much anxiety because it has met, the senses have met its sense objects. So there's a rush. So the mind indulges. Indulgence is a reckless contact. A heedless contact with the sense objects is indulgence. And then after the experience, The tendency of the mind is it lingers. Lingers is exactly like if you see a cattle or a cow, after they graze, you find the cattle bring the food back into the mouth and they chew the cud, isn't it? So that process of just reliving, lingering over the past experiences, the memories of the past, is known as lingering. So the three tendencies of the mind starts craving, the mind starts indulging, the mind starts lingering. Now, what do these three do to you? What does these three does is it actually creates thoughts, it strengthens thoughts into desires, and it converts desires into vasanas. So you are actually creating more wants and desires through the unintelligent process of craving, indulging, lingering. Now, take an example. A child has got a new toy. The mind of the child is constantly thinking of the toy. So the mind of the child is so carried away, is so engaged with the thought of the toy, it is indulging, isn't it? So what does a child develop? The child develops a tremendous attachment to the toy. Inevitable. Wherever the mind goes, there is an element of attachment. A boy meets a girl, he's constantly thinking of the lover, he's thinking of his beloved. There is a constant attachment. Only thoughts are going ungoverned, uncontrolled. You develop tremendous attachment. Now, when the same process of thoughts going becomes controlled, uncontrolled thoughts provide attachment. But the moment they are controlled with the help of an intellect, it becomes reflection. Are you all with me? When the intellect does it consciously, it becomes reflection. Now, as we have said, the ideas are given by the gurus. We learn these ideas. But how do you make it your own? You got to go through the process of reinforcing these ideas, revisiting these ideas through the process of conscious reiteration. Exactly like the principle of advertisement. What is the principle of advertisement? Srini, can you tell me what is the principle involved in advertisement?
It's to convert your mind into and convert you to believing in the promise that the product is trying to, product or whatever the concept that you're trying to advertise.
So what would they end up doing? They end up convincing you on the product,
on the idea, yeah.
On the idea or the product or whatever, isn't it? Now,
Yep.
But how does that enter into your mind?
Well, it's based, first is visual and audio cues. That's how it comes.
So there is an audio visual, or there's some input. You see an advertisement somewhere, or you see a billboard somewhere, or you come across in some form, and the thought gets into you, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The thought gets planted into your mind, and then thereafter, what the media then thereafter takes over. What they do, they continuously keep pounding that idea onto you. Imagine a new car is being launched in the market. How do you go about it? It's constant. And if you're watching a match or a movie, or you're with the television for a few hours, believe me, and if they are the key sponsors for that event, you had it, you will end up seeing more of the advertisement than the matches, isn't it? And end of that, what would happen? Let's say you had a thought of you have an intention of buying a car, and the fact that the new car is being launched in the market, they have successfully reinforced a thought of their particular brand in your mind, isn't it? It could be a Mercedes, it could be a Kia, it could be a Suzuki, it could be any brand. And that has gone into you. What is advertisement thereafter? It's a repetition of a thought being pounded onto you, which gains a serious mental impression. That's all, isn't it? Now, the principle we understand, but when we adopt the same principle process in the reflection, what we're doing is we are engaging the same process through a conscious exercise of repeating these ideas and trying to reinforce them. Now, most of us don't do that. We are not revisiting these ideas. It just stays put as mere information in us. We heard it, we understand it, we appreciate it. We also understand the importance of it, but then we have not done anything about it. Have we? Srinivas Reddy Garu, are you following, sir? We don't do anything about it. So what happens? Information just remains as mere impressions on your mind. But when I sit back, when I revisit these ideas, when I start questioning them, when I start analyzing them, when I start reflecting on them, digesting them, when I go through this process, that's where you get the rasa. Rasa is that, what's the best word for rasa? Yeah, Vijay Raghavanji? Juice.
Which
What's the, yeah, Vijay Raghavanji, what's the best word for rasa?
essence.
You get the essence, you get the reminiscence, you get the flavor, you get that impact that is there, you get the takeaway. So when that is not done, it just remains as it is. So this is not being done, and this is usually done the early morning, pratah smarami, between 4 and 6 a.m. So when you reinforce these ideas in the early morning, that's the time you gain the wisdom. In fact, real spiritual change or transformation only happens those 2 hours. It may sound strange, it may sound baffling, mind-boggling. Why is it so? You are spiritually, you change only from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. 6 a.m. to 4 a.m., there is no spiritual change happening. It's all cosmetics. Whatever you do bhakti, whatever you listen, whatever you do karma is just trying to help you, to comfort you. But the real change happens 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. So the first step in the wisdom is to question everything. Prashnena. Therefore, they say one of the qualities of a student is to question. If you don't question, you're not a student of this knowledge. The first step of this wisdom is to question, and then the last step is to come with terms with everything. You start by questioning and then come to terms with whatever is said. That's how the whole journey ends. So when a thought is not reinforced, it just remains as it is. It doesn't benefit you. And when you have done sufficient reflection on the ideas, the takeaway of that is you gain intellectual clarity. Wherever there is wisdom, you must understand wisdom expresses as clarity of intellect. You think clearly. The thinking becomes clear. Now, many a time when we talk of the intellect, there are three stages of the availability of the intellect. You'll understand the benefit of this reflection and you'll start actually seeing it. As I've said, remember Srinivas Reddy Garu, in a matter of month or so, if you start doing this exercise, which is to question it, you got to reflect on it, you got to digest it, you got to break it down into pieces, into digestible pieces, you got to analyze it, come to terms with the logic and reason. Don't accept anything on its mere face value. And when you do it and go through it in a methodic process that's steady, you come to a stage where you gain certain clarity. And how do you evaluate that clarity? Is evaluated with the level of intellect. And intellect is always present in three different stages. What are the three different stages that the intellect is available? Anybody? The wisdom expresses as the buddhi or the intellect. And the intellect is available at three different stages. What's that? Looks like Rajima has got two. She's searching for the third. Hmm? Vaidyanathanji, the intellect availability is three stages. The answer actually is very simple. Sorry, sir, we can't hear you. Could you please unmute yourself? Yeah.
First information, then experience, and then absorption as intellect, as validated knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Now that we said information, understanding, experience is ignorance. Okay. Ignorance expresses as three stages. But intellect, see, whatever intellect we have, is it available to you when you need it? Most of the times. Sometimes it's available, sometimes it isn't.
Yes.
So when is it that the intellect is available? Most of the time, I would say not sometime, most of the time.
When you're conscious.
Conscious, yes, conscious. In fact, for many, intellect is available mostly after the experience.
Right.
Especially when there's festive time or there's something which you love, food is prepared. Intellect doesn't work those moments, isn't it? Because you're liking something, you enjoy it, and then you eat another paratha, you eat an extra laddu or an extra samosa, you had that extra bit of helping and serving, and then you said, after that you said, it'll discomfort you feel uncomfortable. When you're in the bed or you're not able to toss around, I said, oh yeah, I shouldn't have had that. What happened to the intellect at that moment? It's not available. Why? Your mind has taken over. Awareness is not there. There's no awareness.
Right. Lack of awareness.
Lack of awareness. See, the only way you'll understand the intellect, we need to go about defining it so we get the clarity. The only way you'll understand wisdom and intellect, how do you measure wisdom and intellect, please? Because we want to be very clear so we understand each other. How do you truly measure one's level of wisdom and intellect? And you'll be shocked with the understanding. Yeah, Sethuramanji.
Spiritual quotient.
Yeah, but how do I know what is my spiritual quotient? How do I actually measure my spiritual quotient, which is wisdom and intellect?
Your diversion into the worldly activities, and mind gets diversed into the worldly activities. Your it is very low.
Even that is very vague. It's very difficult to evaluate. If I have to be in, if we can be in the context, Chitramajan, not that you're wrong, but in the context of the discussion, how would you evaluate your wisdom?
You are focused on the.
Mhm. No, Ji. Yes, Srinivas Ji.
In my view, it could be more of how effectively we control our senses.
How you control your senses and your mind.
Yes.
That's the acid test. Is your mind under your control? That is the measuring tool of your wisdom. It's a litmus test. If your mind is not under your control, that means that is your threshold. You have gone, that is your capacity. Thereafter, you have no control over whatever the mind does. Because then you fall a prey to the craving or the desiring or the greed or the lust or the attachments of the mind. You have no control. You fall a prey to it. You may know it. You're well informed of what you're doing is wrong, but then you will have no control over thereafter. Isn't it? Yeah, Vaidyanathan ji. Sir, please, yeah.
We have to differentiate between intellect and wisdom also, isn't it? Wisdom is after the rasa of intellect that you have accepted, that becomes your wisdom. So intellect is still different from, you could be having the intellect, but not the wisdom also. Would we not differentiate between intellect and wisdom?
In the context for now, we are saying that intellect is a product of wisdom.
Or wisdom is a product of intellect.
No.
You get information, you process it, experience it, then you have the knowledge, the intelligence, the intellect. And out of that, you draw your wisdom, and that takes you in life. Every time you go back to your wisdom, not necessarily to your to the rest of the process, because you have processed it and stored it.
Correct.
This is the then that's why you're called wise when
Yes.
you're with.
In fact, we are in the context of it, we are saying wisdom and the clarity of intellect, the ability to harness and control your mind and your feelings and that self-control and all those areas is synonymous here.
Okay.
You know, because I don't become wise by merely knowing it. I only become wise by able to command and give my personality a direction. And if I not do that, I don't have the intellect. I don't have the wisdom. It's not how well you know it, whether you're living by it. You know,
Absolutely.
isn't it? So intellect and wisdom, we are actually holding in one breath. They're synonymous. But yet you can also say, for example, Duryodhana, an aggressive bad person, was a very manipulative fellow. He had a very acute intellect, but he had no wisdom at all.
Right.
You see, so those are contexts we will argue differently, but in the context we are saying intellect and wisdom are one and the same.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So when the reflection is set in course, you start seeing the level of awareness. The level of awareness is the availability of the intellect. Most of the time, the intellect is available after the action. So the intellect starts coming from after, it'll come to while, from while it'll come to before, or prior you get into the action, the intellect is available to guide you. So the awareness becomes more ever present. So you don't feel you've committed something wrong. There's a greater awareness of your actions. You take greater control. And this is how the knowledge benefits you. Hmm? Srinivas Garu, following her.
Guruji, can we say the processed knowledge with the help of intellect is wisdom?
The
We
process,
acquire knowledge, means
okay,
we have information,
yes,
and we process the information or knowledge acquired from various sources with the
yes,
help of our intellect. Intellect is my equipment. I process the knowledge with the help of the intellect, which then the knowledge gets converted into wisdom.
yes, you can say that. You're not wrong.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, Srinivas Garu.
Yeah, Guruji, we're talking about reflection and sparing about time of about 1.5 hours to 1 hour. Where is the starting point for the reflection? Because we go through in a day with so many activities and so many issues, which is the point where we need to really pick it up. That is the past, what has been happened has to be reflected, or we need to take a specific topic to start reflecting on that. How is that the genesis or the origination of the reflection?
See, what we have said is reflection contains 70% in proportion to the acquired knowledge. You spend 70 to 80% on reflection and 20% on information.
Right.
And this proportion has to be maintained. And if this proportion goes wrong, you don't get the benefits. Means there's something left unattended. You're not getting the most out of it. For example, when you see this people, squeezing the sugarcane through the rollers to extract the sugarcane juice, you just don't put it once. You just fold it and you keep pushing through the rollers so that you extract, because there's enough juice left in it. The rasa is still there to extract it. So there's enough wisdom in every aspect of the text. In every concept, there's enough wisdom. So you got to start with the ideas you already are aware of. For example, the text we're going through. You can go back from the very first verse so that you are in flow with the thing. But have you processed all that you've learned? Have you questioned everything? Have you found it that you have viewed your own life from your own perspective? How does it relate to my life? How do I connect that to my experiences? So that process needs to start from the very first verse of this text, or any piece of knowledge that comes your way.
Got it.
Put through that scrutiny, literal scrutiny. You are only questioning to understand the logic and the rationale behind the concept. You're not questioning with an attitude of arrogance or to question the authenticity of it, because then you slip into the intellectual arrogance should not creep in. Therefore, we always told to question, but you question it with the atmosphere of devotion to understand, so that it gives you immense benefit. So nothing should be accepted.
Thanks, Guruji.
Yes, nothing should be accepted without your intellectual scrutiny and examination. Nothing. And you will keep revisiting it until it satisfies you, until you feel convinced, yes, this is what it is. And once you go through that, then you'll start relating it to your own experiences. Then you start seeing what the texts or the masters are saying. Okay, Ji?
Okay, thanks, Guruji.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, Hirenji.
Yes, I think I would like to more or less repeat the question what Srinivasji was asking.
Okay.
Say, we need a starting point and a subject, right?
Yes.
So tomorrow morning, if I wake up at 5 o'clock to reflect on something, what do I reflect? Is it something that I thought I did wrong today? And then kind of think it through. I did certain good things and certain bad things. I was angry with somebody today. So do I start in that anger point and start reflecting why and how and my intellect should have behaved separately? So I believe that is a question I think Srinivasji was asking, where is the starting point of a reflection and how do you pick up what do I reflect today, this morning?
So you're not trying to analyze experiences here. You're trying to work with the knowledge. You're trying to work with the material. So therefore, it's important you jot down ideas, you learn concepts, you have access to this knowledge. So you read through these concepts, you examine these teachings, these eternal wisdom. You examine these teachings and you try to understand and make them your own. The
see.
teachings
Okay.
are, you're not trying to go through your experiences. No.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So that's the difference.
I got it. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Sriniji, all okay? All right. Now, if you do this on a daily basis, you will find your intellect slowly starts developing. You will start developing your intellect, and no sooner you will have a very healthy intellect where you will be able to control the vagaries and the worries and anxieties and all that your mind puts you through, which causes a great restlessness. It causes insecurity, it causes mental disturbance. All that comes to rest. It subsides, believe me, because you can't change the very nature of the mind, in inverted commas. I'm not saying that you can't, but let's say that the mind's nature doesn't change, but the intellect's ability to control changes. You're able to control the mind, the strength you have to handle it, to put it in its place. It's not that suddenly the mind becomes more transformed and matured. That happens over a period of time, but the intellect will have strength to handle and keep the mind in its place. All right. So the process is exactly the same, but one is done unconsciously, other is unconsciously. Unconsciously, when you do it is the mind. When you do it consciously, it is the buddhi, the intellect. That's the difference. Harish, you're following, Harish?
Yes, Guruji, I'm following. Thank you.
Right. Okay. All right. If we are clear, shall we move on with the text? Okay.